haven't seen the post-flight analysis of the numbers. We had roughly half of our available oxygen supply remaining in the backpacks, and somewhat less percentage in the water supplies, which is used for cooling. Of course, particularly on our first experience with the use of that backpack on the lunar surface, we were interested in conserving a good bit of margin in case we had difficulty with closing the hatch or repressurizing the LEM, or had any difficulties with getting the systems operating again in the normal fashion inside the cockpit.
Colonel Aldrin and Mr. Armstrong, when President Nixon made his phone call to you on the moon, it looked like the two of you suddenly stopped doing everything and stood there and listened and talked to him. It looked there for a moment like you might have been a little bit aware of what was going on. You weren't busy. Was there ever a moment on the moon where either one of you were just a little bit spellbound by what was going on?
About 2.5 hours.
I'd like to ask Neil Armstrong when he began to think of what he would say when he put his foot down on the lunar surface, and how long he pondered the statement about a small step for man, gigantic leap for mankind.
Yes, I did think about it. It was not extemporaneous, neither was it planned. It evolved during the conduct of the flight, and I decided what the words would be while we were on the lunar surface just prior to leaving the land.
I'd like to ask Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, and I'm not quite sure how to ask this question, but when you first stepped on the moon, did it strike you as you were stepping on a piece of the Earth, or sort of what your inner feelings were, whether you felt you were standing in a desert, or this was really another world, or how you felt at that point?
Well, there was no question in our minds where we were. We'd been orbiting around the moon for quite a while. At the same time, we have experienced 1.6G before. We've been exposed to some degree to the lighting that we saw. However, this was, in my case, an extremely foreign situation with the stark nature of the light and dark conditions. And of course, we first set foot on the moon in the dark, shadowy area.
It's a stark and strangely different place, but it looked friendly to me, and it proved to be friendly.
Some people have criticized the space program as a misplaced item on a list of national priorities. I'd like to ask any of the astronauts, how do you view space exploration as a relative priority compared with the pressing needs of the domestic society and the world community at large?
Well, of course, we all recognize that the world is continually faced with a large number of varying kinds of problems. And it's our view that all those problems have to be faced simultaneously. It's not possible to neglect any of those areas, and we certainly don't feel it's our place to neglect space exploration.
There was a lot of discussion during the flight, during the power descent portion of the flight, about the program alarms and so forth. And I wondered if you all could describe your thoughts on the subject, how it went, and what advice you might have to offer the crews of Apollo 12 and subsequent flights for this portion of the mission.
Well, I think we pretty well understand what caused these programming alarms. It was the fact that the computer was in the process of solving the landing problem, and at the same time we had the rendezvous radar in a powered-up condition, and this tended to add an additional burden to the computer operation. Now, I don't think that either the ground people or ourselves really anticipated that this would happen. It was not a serious program alarm. It just told us that for a brief instant, the computer was reaching a point of being over-programmed or having too many jobs waiting for it to do. You know, a computer continually goes through a wait list of one item after another, and this list was beginning to fill up, and the program alarm came up. Unfortunately, it came at a point when we did not want to be trying to solve these particular problems. We wanted to be able to look out the window to identify the features as they came up so that we would be able to pinpoint just where in the landing ellipse the computer was taking us.
Mills was carrying on a rapid-fire conversation with the computer at that point, but I think we really have to give the credit to the control center in this case. They were the people that really came through and helped us and said, continue, which is what we wanted to hear.
Gentlemen, you're about to take some tours, and I wonder what your feelings are. Is that perhaps the most difficult part of the mission, or are you looking forward to it?
Well, certainly the part that we're least prepared to handle.
What do you consider the most important piece of advice and recommendation that you will give the Apollo 12 crew before the takeoff for the moon in November, gentlemen?
I didn't hear the first one. The recommendations for 12 on which
Will be the most important piece of advice or recommendation for the Apollo 12 crew.
I think we can say that overall, we wouldn't change the plan that we used or the plan that they intend to use. Now, there are a large number of individual details which we think could stand improvement, and we have had the opportunity in the past couple of weeks to go over those details and with the crew members and various people from around the program. In general, I'd say that we wouldn't recommend any major changes to the plan.
Will you recommend any changes in procedures for the moonwalking and exploration procedure? And did you find that your suits were mobile enough in view of the changes, or would you recommend further mobility features for them for operation on the moon?
Well, one gets used to the type mobility that your suit affords you. And, of course, we would like to always have more and more dexterity with arms moving and fingers moving. These things are understudied. Of course, the Apollo 12 mission will have two different periods of EVA, one early in the mission and a sleep period, and then another EVA following that. We've, in general, looked at their plans and talked to them about the duration. We talked to them about a brief period at the beginning of their EVA for their familiarization with the EVA, the 160 environment. I don't think we have any particular recommendations for how they should change their mission. It is a continuing evolvement of EVA capability and scientific exploration that they're undertaking on that flight.
I'd like to ask Colonel Aldrin if you'd elaborate a little bit on your comment earlier about having to anticipate where you were going to walk 3 or 4 steps in advance as compared to just 1 or 2 on Earth. Did you mean that in respect to avoiding craters or deep pits or what?
Well, I mean it with respect to the inertia that the body has in moving at this rate of 5 to 6 miles an hour that we found to be fairly convenient. Due to the reduced force of gravity, your foot does not come down so often, so you have to anticipate ahead and control your body movement. And since your foot is not on the surface for a long period of time, in each step you're not able to bring to bear large changes in your force application, which would enable you to slow down. So in general, we found we had to anticipate 3 or 4 steps ahead instead of maybe the 1 or 2 that you do on the surface of the Earth.
You're now national heroes, and you've had a couple of weeks in isolation in the LRL to think about that. What are your initial feelings about being heroes? How do you believe it will change your lives? And do you think that maybe you'll get another chance to go to the moon, or are you going to be too busy being heroes?
I'll probably get an answer to that question. I might have to spend as long preparing as we had to prepare for Apollo 11. In the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, we did have very little time for meditation, it turns out. We were quite busy throughout the time period with the same sorts of things that the crews of past flights have done after their flights. The debriefing schedules and writing the pilot reports and getting all the facts down for use of all the people who will include that in the future flights.
I'm struck from the movies and the still pictures by the difference in the very hostile appearance of the moon when you're orbiting over it or some distance from it, and the warmer colors and the apparently relatively more friendly appearance of it when you're on the surface. I'd like to ask Colonel Collins if he gets that same impression from the pictures, and the two of you who were on the moon, what impression you have along those lines.
Well, the moon changes character as the angle of sunlight striking its surface changes. At very low sun angles, close to the terminator at dawn or at dusk, it has the harsh, forbidding characteristics which you see in a lot of the photographs. On the other hand, when the sun is more closely overhead, a midday situation, the moon takes on more of a brown color, it becomes almost a rosy-looking place, a fairly friendly place. So that from dawn through midday through dusk, you run the whole gamut. It starts out very forbidding, becomes friendly, and then becomes forbidding again as the sun disappears.
Neil, were you and Buzz, did you have the feeling you were getting a little low on fuel during the landing? Were you concerned at that point about being low on fuel? And the second part of it, I suppose, for Buzz is, out of your experience, how tough do you think pinpoint precision landings will be on the lunar surface on future flights?
Yes, we were concerned about running low on fuel, and the range extension that we did to avoid the boulder field and craters, we used up a significant percentage of our fuel margins, and we were quite close to our legal limit.
Will be based on your experience?
Well, I think it requires some very pinpoint determination of the orbit that the vehicle is in before it begins powered descent, and this requires extreme care in making sure that the ground tracking, because the entire descent is based upon the knowledge that the ground has and puts into the onboard computer of exactly where the spacecraft is. And this starts several revolutions before and then is carried ahead as the computer keeps track of its position. So during sequences like undocking, we have to be extremely careful that we do not disturb this knowledge of exactly where it is, because this then relates in the computer bringing the LEM down to a different spot than everyone thought we were coming into. This is what defines the error ellipse, where we might possibly land having targeted for the center. Now, the ability to be able to control where you are requires that you be able to identify features. And of course, in our particular landing site, this was selected to be as void of significant features as possible, to give us as smooth a terrain. Now, in any area like this, there are always certain identifying features that you can come out, certain patterns of craters. And to the extent that this can be used, if the crew sees that they are not going exactly toward the pre-planned point, they can begin to tell the computer to move to a slightly different landing location. Now, this can occur up in the region of 5,000 to 6,000 feet. Then, as Neil took over control of our spacecraft to extend the range, to get beyond this large crater at West Crater, this again may be required if identification is made in the vicinity of 300, 400, or 500 feet to be able to maneuver that last in the vicinity of 1,000 or 2,000 feet to make a pinpoint landing. But so much depends on the early trajectory, the ability to then redesignate, and the final manual control.
For Mr. Armstrong and more on the landing, did at any time you consider an abort while you were getting the alarms and so forth?
Well, I think that in simulations we have a large number of failures, and we're usually spring-loaded to the abort position. In this case, in the real flight, we're spring-loaded to the land position. We were certainly going to continue with the descent as long as we could safely do so, and as soon as program alarms, computer alarms manifest themselves, why you realize that you have a possible abort situation to contend with. But our procedure throughout a preparation phase was to always try to keep going as long as we could, so that we could bypass these types of problems.
The computer was continuing to issue guidance throughout this time period and was continuing to fly the vehicle down in the same way that it was programmed to do. The only thing that was missing during this time period is that we did not have some of the displays on the computer keyboard, and we had to make several entries at this time in order to clear up that area.
Would the crew consider a moon mission of a similar nature again, or would you prefer to have some other kind of a mission? And secondly, I think this question was asked, but I didn't get the complete answer. How do you propose to restore some normalcy to your private lives in the years ahead?
I wish I knew the answer to the latter part of your question.
Kind of depends on you. But I think the landings of the type that are presently considered for the next number of flights are appropriate to the conclusions that we reach as a result of both our descent work and work on a surface. And I would certainly hope that we are able to investigate the variety of types of landing sites that they hope to accomplish.
I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may. When you were carrying out that incredible moonwalk, did you find that the surface was equally firm anywhere, or were there harder and softer spots that you could detect? And secondly, when you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
The first part of your question, the surface did vary in its thickness of penetration. Somewhere in rather flat regions, the footprint would penetrate perhaps a half an inch or sometimes only a quarter of an inch and gave a very firm response. In other regions near the edges of these craters, we could find that the foot would sink down maybe 2, 3, possibly 4 inches. And in the slope, of course, the various edges of the footprint might go on up to 6 or 7 inches, and compacting this material would tend to produce a slight sideways motion as it was compacted on the material underneath it. So we feel that you cannot always tell just by looking at the terrain what the exact resistance will be as your foot sinks into a point of firm contact. So one must be quite cautious in moving around in this wet terrain.
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
Neil, you were a little bit concerned, you said, about stubbing your toe at the point of landing because the surface was obscured by dust. Do you see any way around that kind of problem for future landings on the moon?
I think the simulations that we have at the present time to enable a pilot to understanding the problems of a lunar landing, that is the simulator and the various lunar landing training facilities and trainers that we have will do that job sufficiently well. Above that, I think it's just a matter of pilot experience.
Mr. Neil Armstrong, you said early in your presentation that masculine W occurred about 3 seconds late, giving you the clue that you might land somewhat long. Now, this was before you got to Highgate, so that it had nothing to do with maneuvering to find a suitable place to land. I'm wondering what would have caused this 3 seconds late. Did it have something to do with the time that you began powered descent, or what?
Well, the time that we started powered descent was the planned time, but the question is, where are you over the surface of the moon at the time of ignition? And where that point is largely determined by a long chain of prior events. Cracking that's taken place several revolutions earlier, the slight maneuvers that have been done in checking out the reaction control systems, the undocking and the ability to station keep accurately without ever flying very far away from where the computer thinks you ought to be at that time. And of course, the little bit of dispersions in the maneuvers, such as the DOI burn on the backside of the moon, that were not quite properly measured by the guidance system. Now, each of those things will accumulate into an effect, an error, a position error at ignition, and there is no way of compensating until you get to final phase for that error.
Based on your own experience in space, do you or any of you feel that there will ever be an opportunity for a woman to become an astronaut in our space program?
Yes, I hope so.
I'd like to refer back to something that Neil Armstrong said a while back, that there was so much out there you would like to have done. As it was, you ended up a considerable number of minutes behind schedule. Is that because the schedule was overloaded for the EVA, or can we expect all astronauts, when they reach the moon for the first time, to enjoy themselves and spend as much time doing so as you seem to?
We plead guilty to enjoying ourselves. As Buzz mentioned earlier, we're recommending that we start future EVAs with a 15 or 20-minute period to get these kinds of things out of the way. Get